Okay, YouTubers, here we go. 2002 Jetta TDI. I'm going to change fuel lines, fuel filter, and purge the system with Liqui Molly. As you can see, I'm showing you all the parts that I do have, and then I had to buy a new fuel filter. Also, we will replace that, new clamps. As I'm taking the hoses off here and taking these clamps off, I just used a regular pair of pliers to take off the clamps, and then I also used a little pick to try to get the hoses up, which you might have to use a pick or a screwdriver to remove the hose. Some of them are kind of tight, and especially the ones that have been on there for a while, kind of baked on there, I guess. Here you can see I'm taking the hose off, a clamp off of the filter itself, since I'm going to replace all the lines that go back and forth from the filter to the injector pump and back from the return lines to the fuel tank. Now, as far as changing all these lines, I did take a picture of everything so I could look back and make sure that I did hook up all the lines back to their original places, and so that I knew I wasn't going to be crossing any of the fuel lines. As you can see, the clamps, putting the new hose clamps on, I went ahead and put the little clamps that you just kind of screw onto the nut there, which you can use a nut driver, a little ratchet, or screwdriver. Some of the areas are a little tight there, so it's kind of hard with those clamps. I guess that's the reason why they put the other pressure clamps on with the little tabs on them. But those are a pain in the butt to take off. As you can see here, I'm going to take another one off, which obviously I just threw all those away. With the pick there, I just kind of shove it in the hose and try to work it around the hose all the way around the fitting there where it fits on, so that hopefully it'll loosen up and then you can just pull it off. Here I'm just stretching it across to see what length I need. And as far as the way I cut it, a pair of good scissors seems to work fine. I mean, I also had a razor knife to use that too. Basically, I just positioned the hose in the right spot where I thought it needed to be, and then I cut it. I did pretty much do one at a time as far as taking them apart, so that way I wouldn't be confused on mixing them up. But like I said, I did take a picture of everything so I knew how it would exactly be routed back in there. There you can see I'm using the scissors to cut the line. Tighten down another hose clamp. For the most part, the front side of the fuel lines definitely a little bit easier than getting to the ones that are behind that go back into the fuel tank, into the hard lines that go into the fuel tank. They're a little more difficult to get to, and they're kind of jammed down in there, kind of underneath and beside, I guess, in a way, for where the antifreeze reserve tank is. Here you can see I just cut this hose off so I could easily get to it without having to pull the whole hose, and just take the end off of the fitting itself. There, finally I managed to get that one off. That one was stuck on there. Now next to the firewall there, just next to the strut housing, there's a hard line that's coming up that actually has a plastic tab on it. It's pretty much like a 90. So I cut the hose here so I could get to that end there without having any problems. But the main thing is you need to be real careful with that plastic 90. You don't want to break it, because then obviously you'll have to replace it, and you don't want to have to do that. So this one gave me a lot of problems actually. It was really stuck on there, hard to get to. So it just was really a pain. As you can see, I'm just trying to move the clamp around, because the clamp itself, the tabs on the clamp were broken, so I couldn't just grab it with the regular pair of pliers. Had to use a pair of needle nose and try to work it over so I could get to it to take it off. And then once I was able to take the clamp off, which you can see,
those blades suck that were in here, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
now I'm putting the hose back on, but the clamp and the hose part there that I took off was really a pain in the butt, and the main thing is just be real careful not to break that plastic 90. I'm working the hose back on there. I just went ahead and kind of grabbed a pair of pliers to kind of see if I could help push it on there, because that hose in there was kind of stiff to get it all the way pushed back in there. Now I'll go ahead and put the clamp back on it, which obviously is a new clamp. Basically, getting these clamps angled at the right spot so I could easily tighten them up was kind of a, well, just have to kind of look at it, move it around a little bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and size this other hose and cut it to length with the scissors again. To me, that was the easiest thing to do, just have a good pair of scissors and it just cut right through there. I'm pushing that line back onto the fuel filter itself. Now it's time to take the other one off. Here I decided to go ahead and disconnect the hose to the antifreeze tank there to give myself a little more access, because both of those ends that were there were right underneath a hose that was going back into that reservoir tank. So I decided just to go ahead and take it off so I could get to the clamp a little easier. Whether you do it or not, it's up to you. I just was trying to give myself a little more room. Now this hard line here, the blue one that you can see there, it was a little easier to pop off since it didn't have the plastic 90 on it, and I could just pull it straight up. But again, I'd be careful and just make sure you don't you know, put any extra stress than you have to, and just get it off of there without causing more problems than you need. Here I just used the pair of pliers to just help me work that hose off of the fuel filter. Now as far as the way I did it, I went ahead and I changed the fuel lines, hooked them all back up, put everything back how it was on the fuel filter, even though I'm going to still change the fuel filter, I wanted to make sure that I didn't have any problems with getting air into the system. So I basically wanted to make sure I could put all the hoses back on there and then start the engine back up to make sure that I wasn't having any fuel problems. Now that clamp, when I was putting the new clamp on, was a little harder to get to, so I just had a little driver that I used and with an extension on it that reached around so I could reach it and tighten it back up. I did make sure that, to make sure and give yourself enough space over the hose, so you leave a little bit of the hose exposed, clamping it on so that it's clamped on nice and won't leak. Here I'm just fitting the hose around to see what it looks like will fit right, so in the direction I want to put it down, because after I did go ahead and fit it underneath the fender next to the reservoir, right around it actually. And then cut it to length. Okay, so that's the last clamp for the fuel lines. That's all put back together. Now I'm just temporarily going to fit that down. There was a little slot there where you could push the hoses into to keep them down in there. Now it's time to go ahead and set up for the Liqui Molly diesel purge. And what I did here was the top of the bottle, actually I just pulled the nozzle out of it and just was able to put the cable right through it, and it fit the fuel line. And here you can see I'm disconnecting the fuel lines again from the fuel filter, which I will be putting a new fuel filter in also, which before this I went ahead and I started the vehicle back up. It ran fine, so I knew there was no air leak or anything sucking in air where it shouldn't be. Now here I'm disconnecting the lines and I'm going to put into the bottle. And that was just the water bottle that we bought at, I believe, a Goodwill store or Salvation Army, something like that, for like 50 cents. And there too I have a filter, which is an inline filter, so for the return line, so when it's dumping the Liqui Molly back in and whatever's coming out from the injectors, it will be cleaned and filtered out so it can keep circulating through. Now I'll get the line itself, that is obviously the line, the feed line, the suction line I guess is what it would be, that's pulling it into the injection pump or the high pressure pump. I just shoved it right down the middle of the bottle, and it actually was nice and a tight fit, so that worked out well, held it in there good. And all I did was just slice a couple slices with my razor knife on the top so I could put the filter through the top, and you can see me pushing it back in there once I filled the bottle up with the Liqui Molly. And there we go, it's all ready to go. Then I went ahead and I used a piece of hose I had left, which all this fuel line was just 5/16. It calls for 8mm, but none of the local auto parts stores carried fuel line in millimeters, so I just went ahead with 5/16, which is the closest to the 8mm. And I went ahead and put it around and just basically looped it into both ports back into the fuel filter. And then when we had the engine running, we pretty much ran it at 2,500 RPMs, just under 3,000, just to kind of help it use the Liqui Molly, because at first we started out about 2,000 RPMs, and that seemed to just not use it up quick enough, because this process itself of cleaning out the fuel injectors, it took a good, I'd say 20 minutes, if not a little more, and that was basically 2,500 RPMs. So obviously I'm holding the tank watching it, so I want to make sure that you don't run out of the liquid, because you don't want to suck in air into your system, because then you'll have a lot of problems, and then they say you have to crack the injector lines and all that kind of stuff, so definitely don't want that problem. And here that's pretty much finished up now. So now I'm going to go ahead and replace the fuel filter. And like I said, it took about probably a good 20 minutes to run the Liqui Molly through the engine and purge it. And I basically ran as much until I got close to the bottom of the bottle, and then I figured that was close enough. Now, as you can see, I'm taking the lines off of the original fuel filter that I had in there, which is my older fuel filter that I'm replacing. Now, as far as doing the Liqui Molly purge, a diesel purge, I've heard some people say that every second oil change or third oil change you should do it, just to help keep your injectors cleaned out. So basically I'm probably going to do it again after a second oil change, maybe a third. And here you can see I'm pulling the fuel filter out so I can get it out of there and take that other line off. And on the top of the fuel filter, the line there has a, I guess they call it Mickey Mouse ear clamp. You'll see it, and you have to pull it out just straight back out of it. You can see right where the clamp goes, and it has a plastic fitting that pops out. And there's actually two O-rings on it, which you can see them there in my hand. There's, as far as the ones that I know, it has a blue and a black O-ring, and the blue O-ring goes on the top and the black one on the bottom. And that there you can see it has, and it has an arrow showing the flow, so, and also when the clamp goes back in, you know where the Mickey Mouse ears clip back in. And also the fuel filter itself, I made sure and filled it up with diesel, which just, you know, take your time and fill it up, and so that way you can make sure that your fuel filter is full. You don't want to just put an empty fuel filter back in there, then you will have some difficulty starting it, and I'm sure. There was a little bit of Liqui Molly left in the bottom of the bottle, so I did just put the rest of it in the fuel filter also. And here we go, I'm just putting the filter back in, and I'll hook up the lines all back up. Now, as far as doing this, I've only worked on a German vehicle, which is Volkswagen, very few times, only a couple times, I guess, doing things actually to this car, and that's it. And I've had to do quite a few different things, basically, just to try to do it in an inexpensive way, as far as making sure and saving some money, and because I'm sure, as everyone out there knows, having work done on a vehicle can get pretty expensive and pricey, and so obviously all these maintenance things that I try to do to this vehicle to save myself money, and also it does, you know, it does need this type of maintenance, which obviously I did a complete oil change, which oil filter, drained all the oil out on this, doing all this with the fuel injection, because the fact that all the fuel lines were cracking, and you could see they were really they were old and they needed to be changed. I've also changed all the vacuum lines on the car itself, and that helped immensely. If you feel that you're having problems, the engine running rough and different things, and I mean the vacuum lines is definitely something that doesn't hurt to change, because they do get all the heat from the engine, and as you know, these little TDIs, they run pretty hot under the hood there, so it does have a tendency of drying up all the different vacuum lines and fuel lines. Now, as far as the little tab, which I was talking about, the Mickey Mouse ears, you have to really push it down into the canister as far as where you can tell the little O-rings were on the end of it, to make sure so that tab fits over and clips back into place there on the top of the fuel filter. Here I'm just tightening the two hoses onto that one piece that will push back into the fuel filter. For me, it was just easier to go ahead and hook up the two lines and then just push it down in there. I mean, the tab did give me a little trouble there, so to get it in there. Now, as far as the fuel filter housing itself, it does have a clamp on the outside of it there, where it has a Phillips on it, Phillips head, so you just kind of unscrew it and just kind of back the screw out a little bit. You don't want to pull it out too much, because the way the clamp's set up is it will just come right off. So all you want is enough access to pull out the fuel filter, which once you loosen it up a little bit, it will just pop straight out of there. Here I just kind of had a little screwdriver and I just made sure that I popped the ears around in the right spot there. You'll see on the metal housing of the fuel filter how that Mickey Mouse clamp goes around there. Now it's just time to hook up the other hoses. And like I said, once you have all those hoses disconnected, before you do that, you definitely want to take a picture of it, so that way you don't have any problems with making sure you line them up the right way, as far as where the return line goes in and the pressure line goes for the suction out of the filter. So basically just all of this is just putting it back all together there. And as far as anyone out there, I just basically did this so on video so people could see how somebody who doesn't really work on these type of vehicles and they're just learning can do quite a bit of this stuff yourself and hopefully save you quite a bit of money. And also, in the end, helps your vehicle run quite a bit better, because I could definitely tell once this was done and I took it out on the road, and did have a little quicker response and it seemed to idle a little better. So definitely it was beneficial and helped out. So that's it. It's finished and ready to go, and we're